Magandang araw sa inyong lahat at welcome sa isa na namang video patungkol sa Diplomatic History of the Philippines. Ngayong araw na ito at sa videong ito, ang ating topic ay External Affairs of the Philippines at ito'y magsisimula nung panahon na lumaya tayo mula sa mga Amerikano nung July 4, 1946 hanggang sa kasalukuyan. Ngunit ang focus natin ay nung mga unang 30 taon mula nung lumaya tayo. Ang videong ito ay nakabase sa aklat ni Teodoro Agoncillo na The History of the Filipino People at ang isang chapter doon ay patungkol sa External Affairs of the Philippines. So ang ating Historical Foreign Policy of the Philippines, si Agoncillo ang nag-coin nito, the three paramount planks of Philippine foreign policy. Number 1, close association with the United States of America. Number 2, sympathy for the aspirations of all dependent countries, particularly of Asia. And number 3, cooperation with the United Nations. Yan ang nahinuha ni historian Teodoro Agoncillo nung kanyang tiningnan ang mga policies na inilabas, mga batas na naipasa, at ang mga kilos mismo ng ating mga leaders at mga diplomats natin. Sa inaugural speech ni Pangulong Manuel Rojas noong July 4, 1946, ito ang quotation mula sa kanyang speech. As we pursue our career as a nation, as we churn through treacherous waters, it is well to have a landfall that we may know our bearings and chart our course. Our safest course, and I firmly believed it, true for the rest of the world as well, is in the glistening wake of America, whose sure advance with mighty prow breaks for smaller craft the waves of fear. President Manuel Rojas believed that America thinks of the welfare of smaller countries such as ours. And President Manuel Rojas believed that it is safe to follow the course of America. In all conferences, conventions, meetings where America is pushing for a stand, the Philippines voted for whatever America would want to advance. Manuel Rojas aims for closest cooperation with the United States of America in all matters concerning common defense and security. Kaya naman, marami tayong mga trade agreements and treaties with the United States of America. I-run down natin. The Philippine Trade Act of 1946 or the Bell Trade Act. Agreement concerning military bases. Signed in Manila, March 14, 1947. The Tidings Rehabilitation Act. Quirino-Foster Agreement, November 14, 1950. The Mutual Defense Treaty between the Republic of the Philippines and the United States of America, August 30, 1951. And the Laurel-Langley Agreement, December 15, 1951. Of course, ang Philippine Trade Act of 1946, also known as the Bell Trade Act, was criticized a lot kasi nga kapalit ng tulong, it requires the Philippines to actually grant parity rights to to Americans in the exploitation and development of the natural resources of our country. You see, in 1946, we are a country totally devastated by the World War II, and we have no choice but to seek help to once upon a time our colonizer, now a friend. We were forced to sign the Philippine Trade Act of 1946, which actually requires the Philippines to grant um, parity rights to foreigners, to Americans specifically. And that is the reason why anywhere in the Philippines may mga paper mills na mga Amerikano ang may-ari, may mga sugar mills na the Americans own them. It really is a loop-sided agreement. No? Pero wala tayong choice. Kasi when we badly need help for our war-torn economy. Another is Mutual Defense Treaty between the Republic of the Philippines and the United States of America. That's August 30, 1951. That is still a valid treaty na any attack sa Philippines or to any warships of the Philippines or to any territory of the Philippines, it will actually invoke the America to help, no? Because it's a mutual defense treaty. This was also criticized on the grounds that it is not automatic. That is, America needs to consult first its Congress or to undergo through a constitutional process before declaring war. No? The Filipinos were actually criticizing the law. But right now, with our heightened tensions in our territorial dispute with China over some islands in West Philippine Sea, the United States is invoking that it wants to interfere with the tensions at the West Philippine Sea. Lately, Anthony Blinken threatened China that any aggression that it may show or it may inflict on Filipino ships can actually trigger the operations of the Mutual Defense Treaty between the Republic of the Philippines and the United States of America. Pagkatapos ng World War II, kung saan pinalaya ng Amerika ang Pilipinas, nakakagulat na mas dumami pa ang mga Pilipinong nagpunta ng Amerika at doon na nanirahan, or mga Pilipino at Pilipinang nag-asawa ng mga Amerikano. Kumbaga, kung kailan tayo humiwalay dahil gusto nating maging malaya, tsaka naman nagkaroon ng mga intermarriages, mga mail-to-order bride, mga pen pals. No? Nagkaroon naman ng deeper interracial relationship yung dalawang bansa. Gayunpaman, may mga tinatawag na irritants to Filipino-American relations. The first one is the identity of Filipino-American interests is more sentimental and rhetorical than real and substantial. Yan yung mga sinasabi ng mga nationalists Filipinos, gaya ni na Claro M. Recto. No? There are actuations of the U.S. government and the American personnel who do not conform to the Filipino idea of friendship. Tulad nitong Minsan May Isang Gamo-Gamo, isa itong movie ng isang American happy trigger na binaril niya yung isang Filipino sa loob ng military base ng Amerika. And when he was confronted kung bakit niya binaril ang Filipino, ang kanyang defense ay akala niya isang baboy damo. Off-duty siya, nag-hunting siya. So, binaril niya, hindi niya alam, tao pala, Pilipino ito, na empleyado mismo, no? ng isang military base. No? Kaya, dito ang famous line ni Nora Honor dyan, "My brother is not a pig, hindi baboy ang kapatid ko." The Filipinos have come to realize that the American intentions have not been exactly altruistic and benevolent. nare-realize ng mga Pilipino, ang mga Amerikano ay pumunta dito para yumaman, kumita sa ating natural resources. Hindi dahil mahal nila ang Pilipinas at aalagaan nila ang Pilipinas. Kumbaga, tayo ay nabubuhay sa ilusyon na ang Amerika ay wala nang ibang tinitingnan kundi ang ating kapakanan. Nakalimutan natin na sa diplomasya, laging ina-advance ang pansariling interes ng isang bansa. Nakalimutan natin na una sa lahat, Amerika muna ang iniisipin nila. No? Hindi nila isipin, Pilipinas muna, alagaan ng Amerika. No, no, no. So kaya naman, itong mga nationalist Filipinos, no, pinareview nila ang tinatawag na Philippine-American Special Relations. No? Sabi nila, Filipinos embraced the mistaken belief that the Americans have nothing but pure love for them. Nationalist Filipinos believe that the salvation of the Filipino nation lay in self-reliance and self-help. Nationalists demand the abolition of the parity rights, dismantling of the United States military bases, and the termination of the Laurel-Langley Agreement. Nationalists also advocated for independent foreign policies and for Filipino-controlled national economy. Yung mga nag-iisip na mga Pilipino, ipinaglalaban nila na tanggalin na yung tinatawag na special relations. No? Huwag nating isipin na wala nang ibang iniisip ang Amerika kundi ang ating kapakanan. Mali yun. Unang-unang iniisip ng Amerika ang kanilang sariling kapakanan. Yayaman muna sila mula sa ating resources bago sila tutulong. At yan yung tinatawag na parity rights. No? At yan ay pinapatanggal ng mga Filipino sa Laurel-Langley Agreement. No? At yung US military bases ay nag-agree, namili tayo na babaan mula sa 99 years na lease. Gusto nating babaan sa 25 years na lang. Mabuti na lang, sumabog ang Mount Pinatubo at napilitan silang umalis kasi both ang Clark Field at saka Subic Bay ay nasa anino ng Mount Pinatubo na sumabog nga noong 1991, no? Forcing the Americans to leave the area. Prinangka na tayo mismo ng US President Richard M. Nixon nung siya'y bumisita sa Pilipinas noong July 27 hanggang 28, 1969. Sa airport, sa kanyang exit conference, ito ang kanyang sinabi. As I come to the Philippines, in this brief stay, I hope I can initiate a new era of Philippine-American relations, not returning to the old special relations because the winds of change have swept away those factors, but building a new relationship which will be based on mutual trust, on mutual confidence, and on mutual cooperation. So, si US President Richard Nixon na himself said that the special relations is already obsolete. No? Yung meron tayong laging claim na special tayo sa mga Amerika. No. US President Richard Nixon himself ended that era of special relations. Gusto niya relationship na may mutual trust, mutual confidence, and mutual cooperation. More equal. No? Walang special privileges. No? The second plank of our diplomatic relations is the sympathy for the aspirations of all dependent countries, particularly of Asia. Simula nung lumaya tayo, the first concern of the Philippines was to restore ancient relations with Asian neighbors. History will tell us na the Philippines, although hindi pa siya Philippines noon, but a group of islands, no, of independent settlements, no, meron siyang mga ancient relations with other countries in Asia, especially China, Japan, Indochina, uh, the present Malaysia, Indonesia, no, and even as far as India. So what we did was we restore ancient relations with Asian neighbors. Asian nations work for the rediscovery of their national identities and their interdependence in cultural, social, and economic matters. No? Asian nations resumed ancient relations. And then the Philippines support the independence of nations, especially in Asia. And the Philippines have treatises of friendship with Pakistan, India, Vietnam, China, Japan, USA, and with all ASEAN countries. The map, it's called the Selden Map of China. And makikita sa left side of the map, no, is the Philippine Islands, no, na obvious ang Luzon and then Palawan. And then if you enlarge the map, you can see trade routes. May mga linya na cannot be seen directly right now, but if you enlarge the map, you could see trade routes and then directions. So this map could have been a trading map, no? In the 16th, 17th century. Historians claim that it is possible that the Selden map of China was drawn in the Philippines because the Philippines was prominent, no? And the West Philippine Sea was prominent in the said map. Philippines is very active in the development of Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO. Pursuant to the second plank of the Philippine foreign policy, sympathy for the aspirations of all dependent countries, particularly in Asia, Philippines was one of the founding state of Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or SEATO. SEATO was a regional defense organization which existed from 1955 to 1977. It was signed at Manila on September 8, 1954 by representatives of Australia, France, New Zealand, Pakistan, the Philippines, Thailand, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It was formed as a response to communist expansion in Southeast Asia area. It formally ended on June 30, 1977. What is successful, however, is the association of the Southeast Asian nations, or ASEAN. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, was established on August 8, 1967 in Bangkok, Thailand, with the signing of the ASEAN Declaration. The founding states are Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Brunei Darussalam joined in 1984, Vietnam joined in 1995, Myanmar 1997, Lao PDR 1997, and Cambodia 1999. They joined the bloc, comprising of the present ASEAN 10 member states. ASEAN aimed to promote peace and security and foster economic development and cooperation in Southeast Asia. Here is Narciso Ramos. He is our representative to the signing of the ASEAN Declaration, and he is the father of the Philippine President Fidel V. Ramos. Representative of the Philippines, Narciso Ramos, said that ASEAN was established at all in spite of these difficulties meant that the foundations had been solidly laid. The ASEAN Declaration truly taxed the goodwill, the imagination, the patience and understanding of the 5 participating ministers. A great sense of urgency had prompted the ministers to go through all that trouble. The forces were arrayed against the survival of the countries of Southeast Asia in those uncertain and critical times. Minister Narciso Ramos became one of the founding fathers representing the Philippines in the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. The third plank of Philippine diplomatic relations is the Philippines being active in the United Nations. The Philippines believe that it must fully and actively participate in the ideals and work of the United Nations. The Philippines, represented by President Manuel Quezon, the Philippines was already actively forging relationships with other free nations. The Philippines joined the Flag Day held at White House, United States of America, on June 13, 1940. While we are actually under the Japanese rule and the Philippine government is doing its work on exile in the United States. No? These nations in these photos with their flags behind them allied against the Axis powers. So the Philippines is already very active in the Association of Free Nations. The sitting man is Brigadier General Carlos P. Romulo, the chair of the Philippine Commonwealth Delegation, at a press conference during the San Francisco Conference, which actually led to the establishment of the United Nations. So why United Nations and how did it come about? So United Nations is still a very successful association of free nations right now. And it was established because the World War II ruined the nations of the earth, and thus the world wanted peace. So technically, United Nations was established so that all the world will unite to rally behind peace and no to war. We're so serious with that in the Philippines that it found a way through our constitutions. No, pumasok yan sa ating constitution na the Philippines renounces war. No? So the representatives of 50 countries came to San Francisco, California from 25th of April to 26th June in 1945 to a meeting dubbed as the United Nations Conference on International Organization. They drafted and signed the United Nations Charter, creating the United Nations, which aimed to prevent another world war. Ayan. The Philippine Commonwealth Representative General Carlos P. Romulo, who signed the United Nations Charter on June 26, 1945. Behind him are the rest of the Filipino delegation. So active talaga tayo, no? And we're so serious about our obligations sa United Nations. To give you an idea kung ano ang United Nations at bakit tayo active, the United Nations or the UN is an international organization established on October 24, 1945. So less than a year before we become independent, the United Nations is already established. Gayunpaman, bago pa man tayo lumaya, ay nag-participate na tayo sa United Nations sa paghahandang magiging member din naman tayo kapag lumaya tayo. Its predecessor, the League of Nations, was created by the Treaty of Versailles in 1919 and disbanded in 1946. Ayan. So its headquarters is in New York City. It has regional offices in Geneva, in Vienna, and in Nairobi, in Kenya. No? Its official languages are Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. Ang mga Filipinos, they can speak English, and some Filipinos can speak Spanish. Some Filipinos can speak Chinese, and many Filipinos in Mindanao who are Muslims can speak or are studying Arabic. We will have a run-through on the purposes of the United Nations so that we will have an idea why the Philippines is very active to it. In general, sa mga memorandum of agreement na pinasok niya, he really, truly honors it. May mga countries na after signing the documents and getting what they want, they don't honor the documents anymore, or they don't honor the international tribunals, the international agencies that are implementing the agreements. No? For the Philippines, we seriously took to heart our commitments to international bodies. And that's basically our culture, and it shows in our diplomatic relationships. So the purposes include to maintain international peace and security, and to that end, to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of peace. To bring about peaceful means in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to a breach of the peace. If you remember, we have a standoff with Chinese encroachers in our Mischief Reef and in many parts of our territorial seas in the Western Philippine Sea covered by the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Seas as the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. The 300 nautical mile exclusive economic zone is actually shared by other claimants who are also archipelagic in nature, but definitely not with China. And China adopting an expansionist policy very recently, has been domineering the West Philippine Sea. Philippines filed a claim before international courts, and so the international court declared China's claim of 9-dash line illegal, upholding the Filipino claim to the West Philippine Seas, or at least much of it. Number 2, to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for principle of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms of all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in attainment of these common ends. Our relationship with World Health Organization, Food and Agriculture Organization, United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, World Bank, International Labor Organization, International Monetary Fund, among many others. So thank you so much for listening. Your assignment is a reaction. How do you react to the President of the Philippines, Pangulong Rodrigo Duterte, saying that the Philippines winning in the International Tribunal regarding the mischief reef, which invalidates also the claim of China over most of West Philippine Sea as a mere scrap of paper. Sinasabi ng Pangulo natin, wala daw silbi yung panalong yon. How do you react to that? Thank you very much and have a nice day.